Hello, everyone. I'm not sure if we're live, but I believe we are. Welcome, everyone, to A Good Place here on Revolution Radio, the number one listener-supported radio station in the world. And I'm very proud to be part of this incredible team. And Donald Jeffries, my friend and co-host, will be joining me as well. Today, I'll be interviewing someone who is more controversial than my usual guest. But before we get into that, let me give you information about him. His name is Rick Clay. And Rick was appointed by President George W. Bush as a senior deputy advisor with responsibility to oversee the Iraqi Ministry of Housing and Construction from 2003 to 2009. He was responsible for Iraqi property construction and reconstruction projects and advised the U.S. ambassador and commanding generals in Iraq on military facility designs and constructions, infrastructures development, and civil engineering project implementation. In his capacity, he served as one of the principal managers of the Iraqi National Construction Directorate, was responsible for managing roughly 180,000 employees and successfully administering approximately $1.6 billion in civilian and military construction projects in post-conflict Iraq. Mr. Clay has also contributed to the creation and organization of the U.S. government's international disaster assistance response teams and was responsible for natural disaster and conflict sustainability. Mr. Clay has served as a senior executive of several companies in the U.S. domestic wireless industry. He is a continuing contributor to the Military Warrior Support Foundation, a nonprofit organization which has so far given free and clear title to approximately 700 plus homes and home economics training to U.S. veterans of Afghanistan and Iraq. He is also actively engaged with local, state, and federal policy advocacy. Mr. Clay has a BS in political science from Marshall University, and he has served both as a U.S. Marine and a West Virginia National Guardsman. But today we are here to speak with him about his involvement with Mueller's Russian investigation, which he was subpoenaed to be questioned as part of the investigation. And what followed was quite harrowing experience, to say the least. So without further ado, let's jump right in. And I'm intrigued by this testimony and his experience and wanted to share, especially after the announcement of Mueller's investigation results. So this couldn't be more timely. So I just want to say welcome, Rick. Thank you so much for agreeing to this interview.
Oh, it's my pleasure, and thank you for having me.
Okay, so I guess how did this all begin? How did you become part of Mueller's probe? I guess that's a good place to start.
Right. Well, it actually started in the Senate, and I'll give you some context. Back in 2017, as you have to go back to 2017. You have to keep the context of what was going on in the world at the time. You read my short bio, so I have a lot of experience overseas. But one of the things that my bio doesn't say is that I'm a strong advocate of against Christian persecution. I have seen this firsthand throughout the world, and I've seen not only of Christians but of Yazidis. And moderate Muslims as well, by ISIS and different extremist groups. And but the closest to my heart, being that I'm a Christian, that seeing such atrocities really spurred me into doing whatever I could, to help thwart that. And some opportunities arose during the campaign that I felt was an ability to step in, because at the time you had the ISIS caliphate was just expanding considerably out of Syria into Iraq and up into Erbil. They were systematically executing Christians, beheading them, drowning them in cages, setting them on fire, crucifixions. And then also what they were doing with the Yazidis on top of that mountain. And I've actually been on that mountain, and I know these people quite well. And then you had Boko Haram that was going crazy in Africa with their execution of Christians and kidnapping of the women, and some of which are still missing to this day. And some of the children and women from the Yazidis have just recently been liberated, with the complete downfall of the caliphate, and credited that to President Trump and our great, U.S. military forces and our allies. But that was the context of this overture, and a good friend of mine who I have a tremendous respect for. He's more inclined in the Christian community than I was, and he was approached, some time ago about from several Russians who were at a Russian prayer breakfast that he attended, and he saw an opportunity to bring the Russian Orthodox Church and bring it together with Christians here in the United States to help, combat that, for Christian persecution. Because at the time, and this is my opinion, at the time, I think the Obama administration was sadly missing in that fight, and so were a lot of other people. My opinion, and so I was asked by this individual, who I have tremendous respect for, because he knew that I had contacts within the Trump campaign, if we could put these forces together. And so I made the overture, through my intermediaries or the contacts that I had with the Trump campaign. And at the time, what I was doing was I was providing kind of like a weekly update of what I was hearing out here. I call it the American pickle barrel, but a lot of people call it flyover country. It's between the coastal elites, and whatever particularly was the issue of the day. Whether it was what was going on in Iraq or in Syria, or what was going on in the campaign trails about certain policy positions and so forth. And I'm very astute about reading and listening to the people out here. Mm-hmm. And I was conveying those observations, to a couple of people in the Trump campaign, and I really didn't know just how much it was disseminated. I know it was disseminated, pretty highly, and occasionally I would get a response. But I really didn't know who was reading it, or matter of fact, even if anybody was reading it, they probably could have been putting in foul 13 for all I know. But I later learned that wasn't the case. And so I was providing this information about what I was seeing, and quite accurately so. And I made this overture out of respect for this particular gentleman. And I was working with one of my main contacts that I had gotten through my local senator here was Rick Dearborn, who at the time was the chief of staff of Senator Sessions. And I communicated this request up to Rick, and I had some problems with it because there were several things. Because it was basically a person who knows a person who knows a person asking somebody to make an overture. And that's what I did. And because I trusted the person below that had given it to me, and rightly so. And out of respect for me, it was moved up the ladder. And I had a conversation with Rick about it, and we had the concerns, because it just so happens at that particular time is when Trump had received the necessary delegate votes to become the presumptive nominee of the Republican Party. And that put everything in a totally different light, than just, some campaign going on, somebody in this big, debate to somebody who actually is the presumptive nominee of a major political party. And we had some problems with that because at that time we felt like that any such overtures from a third party like this should probably go through official channels. And we had the discussion, and that's what and I agreed with that, but it was kicked up anyway. And I really didn't know until I actually was in the hearings just how far that went up. But it went high up. But also publicly, when it became a breaking news story, it was revealed that Jared had actually reviewed the request, and he made a campaign policy decision based upon our recommendations, and it was the correct one. And the correct one was that any such third-party request such as this will not be entertained. It should be taken. The appropriate action they would have to do the State Department, because he was now the presumptive nominee. And that wasn't a one-off decision. That was a decision that they made campaign-wide. And Rick calls me and tells me about, he apologized. He didn't want to hurt my feelings or anything like that, but he knew that I agreed with him, and I agreed with that decision completely. Well, we never really talked about it ever since, and I went on providing my insights to, the campaign all the way through, his where he was elected president. And but one day I was watching CNN, which is very unusual for me, and I found out that I was CNN breaking news story for like a week and a half. And but they were referring to what I was doing as WV, because I never went by my when it was communicated to the campaign, they always referred to me as WV. And the context of that time was that that made it even more salacious was the fact that then Governor Justice, who was elected as a Democrat, had just switched parties to Republican. And so they were really, really hoping that this was Governor Justice that had done this, or Senator Capito. And when
you say they, you mean the Democrats?
Yes, the Democrats. Yeah, they were just, they and the media, news media, they were just, because it was big news that Governor Justice had switched parties, and they wanted to hang him, and plus they were out to get Trump anyway, so when it kept going, and they started blaming the governor, there was no way I could stay silent, because he had nothing to do with this. He was being wrongly accused, and I wasn't about to sit back and let that happen.
So what were they accusing you of?
They were accusing me. They're trying to find out who I was. They were still trying to figure out who WV was, because it was only known to a few people who I was, and but somebody from the Intelligence Committee or the Judiciary Committee leaked the email. And then I started getting phone calls. That's why I was, they had got this request. They had leaked the emails, and they were able to track me down. Now, Manu Raj at CNN contacted me, and I was very hesitant to talk to anybody from CNN, and for obvious reasons. And we all see that now today, how it's being played out today, how wrong they were about so many things. But I have to give him credit. He actually reported on me correctly, and he did so in context, and he did so often, and quoted me often. And I've told him personally that I appreciated his journalistic ethics that he showed in dealing with me. But it died down, and the reason why it died down was because if you follow what happened, it absolutely totally vindicates the Trump administration from way back in August of 2017, and that just didn't play the narrative. So nobody wanted to go after it until I got subpoenaed to appear before the Senate Intelligence Committee and the Senate Judiciary Committee. Actually, I didn't get subpoenaed. They asked me. They were going to subpoena me, but I voluntarily went in. And I hope you don't mind, but I had to give my kudos to my attorneys, my attorney Nathan Bowles and Sherry Gilbert here in West Virginia. They had me excellently prepared for this, I went into I've done probably all in all 12 hours before both committees, It put a tremendous amount of financial strain on me and my family. A lot of
I'm sorry to interrupt you there.
Sorry,
what was the reason they were giving for this request with you?
Well, they just they wanted to run the chain of, because all the players involved in this were all very known players. You had, you have Marina Bettina, you have Alexander Tushkin. They were all, they're all in this. It wasn't a penetration exercise on the Russians to penetrate the Trump administration. In looking back at it, from 2020 hindsight, it could have very well been. But the underlying and the most glaring thing is the Trump administration didn't fall for it. They made the correct decision way back then. And so the findings that I now, that we just, have read from the Mueller report do not surprise me. I've preached this during 12 hours of testimony, and ever since, But you have to live with this, and you have to keep quiet, and you have to kind of say nothing until this investigation was over, and you have that anxiety, because it's not you just don't. This doesn't just affect you; it affects your family. Your finances and your family. And the Democrats in the media didn't really care about that too much. And I think you see that being played out in a lot of different scenarios with some of the players that you see here. It's a big burden. You worry about the car that's coming across the bridge to your home is you don't recognize. Okay, is that the FBI coming to talk to me or whatever? You just don't know. Your children are afraid because of if people making a connection between them and you, and given the controversy, what's going to happen? Are they going to be accosted? Are they going to be threatened? Like you see so much of the Trump people being done, and in these acts that you see happening in restaurants and so forth. And I'm not too worried about myself because I know I can handle myself. But you think about your kids, and you worry about that. And it has some dramatic effects on you. So the Mueller report, when it ended on Friday, when it came out on Friday, was just like a big weight coming off my shoulders, off of that. And you find out who your friends are, and who the fair weather friends are, and so forth. So it was a trying experience. But I would sit there and talk with people and listen to their how they were portraying, not only in the media but here, also in the public, of how they were portraying this collusion thing, and it was so far off from what I knew. But you just can't say anything; you're not allowed to, and it very, very aggravating. So I'm very thrilled at, and I have to say I'm a little bit surprised at just how exoneration that the Mueller report was. I totally expected that, but I didn't really expect it to be that strong. And I'm glad it was, because the Trump administration, a Trump campaign, at a very, very early stage, if there was Russian collusion, they would have taken up this offer. Mm-hmm. Everything was there, and they would have taken up this offer, but they killed it, and they said it was inappropriate. It needed to go through the State Department, and I couldn't have agreed more. This
is kind of out of context, but it's something I'm curious about. So when CNN interviewed you, I guess you told the news networks that you couldn't recall the names of the Russians that you had spoke to, and you would not disclose the name of the friend who sought the meeting.
Sure.
Is there a reason for that, other than maybe protecting them?
Yeah, the friend, the friend, he's very, very suspicious of the media. He doesn't like the media, and I agree with him. And he asked me to just, to keep that quiet for him. And so with the media, I did not say I never used his name, and I still don't. And I won't until he gives me permission to say so. And so far he hasn't done that. And I don't really talk to him that much anyway, because that was another thing. When this happened, as soon as this story broke, and then also when I got requested to appear, I stopped all communications with everybody involved with this, and not because they were trying to hide anything. He didn't want to give the appearance of inappropriate behavior, because you're being monitored, and they know what the calls you make, they know who you're talking to, and you have to be careful what you do. So in order to keep from giving that appearance of impropriety, I stopped all communications with that. And now this is over with. The doors are opening now. It's actually been a very pleasant experience in the last 48 hours.
Well, that's good. I'm sure you're glad to hear that. And like you said, it seems like you have a weight off your shoulder now. And Donald, I'm sure you have questions yourself before we get any further into the story. Would you like to take this opportunity to ask?
Yeah, well, I obviously, as I mentioned earlier, I've written a lot about this, and I think this Russian collusion is one of the few conspiracy theories that I immediately reject out of hand, considering what I normally write about. But I'm curious as to, what is there, in your case, as I understand it, as has happened in, I don't think you were drawn into the email thing, which, as I understand it, Roger Stone and Jerome Corsi are being threatened with prison time, apparently, for merely passing along emails from Julian Assange. Did they charge you? Did they infer that you had any contact with Julian Assange, who I consider a courageous whistleblower? So if you did, good for you. I'd like to contact him. But, or did they claim that you, as I understand it, you met with unnamed Russians? And I don't understand when that became a crime. But that we're not able to meet with people from other countries anymore. So, you, especially you as a private citizen, you were not a part of the Trump campaign, were you?
No, not at all. No, I was not a part of the Trump campaign at all. The only thing that I was doing was actually just offering. I'm a known Republican operative here in West Virginia, but I was only offering up opinion to what I was hearing here in the public in the Appalachian area, and that's from way up in Pennsylvania all the way down into to Georgia, and I travel quite a bit, and I would listen to what was going on. So I was offering, every week just about my take on what the people here were saying, but on whatever subject was, dominating the news at the time. And, they were taking it and they were digesting it. And I would make, I'd make suggestions and things like that, but I have no idea if anybody ever read it or if anybody at the time, anybody read it or anybody even, took it seriously. I've learned that's not the case, but occasionally I would get, a response that this is really good. I wish people had this type of, shared this type of open-mindedness, here inside the bubble of D.C. And, that's what I was doing. And so, at the time, you're trying to do something, positive, helping, address a problem that's worldwide, Christian persecution. And, you think you're doing the right thing, and you happen to know people. So you try to put them together to help address these particular issues. And then you get hung out to dry, by, these political forces or that deep state that want to hang you, on this.
Well, it's amazing to me that they took this kind of which your specialty was trying to address Christian persecution, how they managed to envelop you in this absurd alleged voter fraud. And the same thing happens again with, I think, with Stone and Corsi, and Paul Manafort, I think, faces 7 years in prison or something. I don't. To me, this goes beyond anything that the witch hunt that we saw in the 50s against communists back then, when people were smeared with being fellow travelers and pinkos. And it's amazing that the left supports this, and I've tried to point that out so many times to them. This is exactly what you still rail against. 60-some years later, you're still talking about that, and yet you're doing the exact same thing. And I think in case of someone like yourself, it's really, really absurd. It's the equivalent of claiming someone that went to an ACLU meeting back in the 50s as a communist. So I'm amazed because you actually. So the FBI wasted time talking to you. Did the government agents actually waste time investigating this as if you were in some kind of collusion with these Russians?
12 hours of Senate testimony, both in the Senate and the judiciary, and they wasted their time on that. And they did ask me about WikiLeaks because in one of my references in my emails, I actually reference WikiLeaks, but it's only because I'm well read. And that was actually my answer. They started grilling me on Assange, and I said, look, I have no prior knowledge to any of this, what was in these emails that's released that was getting ready to come out. But the reason I know about it is because I read.
Mm-hmm.
And they could not accept that, for the longest of time, but then they figured it out, that I was telling the truth, and you're well read, you look at things, and and I think Stone is even saying the same thing, and Donald, this is my firm opinion is, other than the hatred and trying to bring down a duly elected president, and then you have what was going on in the deep state, with the Kabbalah that was going. I call it the intelligence Kabbalah. That it was existing in the intelligence agencies at the time, at the highest level, not at the lower levels, but at the highest levels. And what you see now in the media and so forth is, not only for them going after a duly elected president, but also they wanted to suppress and they want to go after. They want to make a point that if you are a supporter of Donald Trump or you are a conservative, you're going to pay a price. And they wanted to make you feel that way. And not just you. It was a message that they're trying to send out to the rest of the electorate, particularly his supporters or conservatives or moderates. And his popularity is starting to grow. People are starting to really see things. And I predict that.
Well, look, I hate to interrupt, but look what happened with. I have my own radio show on Fridays, and I interviewed Todd McMurtry, the lawyer for Nicholas Sandman, one of these Covington, Kentucky kids a couple of weeks ago. And there's a 16-year-old kid who you talk about vilified for supporting Trump. He was wearing a MAGA hat, minding his own business, and they completely took out of context a situation in which they were victims of anything because they were being intimidated and they were just waiting for their bus on a field trip, minding their own business. But because they were for a March for Life rally, Catholic, all-white Catholic, almost all-white Catholic kids, MAGA hats on, some of them, they were demonized, and now, I don't know if any of you all could end up suing maybe eventually down the road, but I'd like to see that. But I think their lawsuit, because they have a high-powered guy, Lynn Wood, leading their defense team, and he doesn't joke around. So I think the governments and these media people are quaking in their boots because he's already gone after CNN and Washington Post. He's going to go after Nathan Phillips. So I would watch that with interest, if I were you, and maybe I'd love to see Stone and Corsi and people like you sue these people down the line, because it really is they tried to destroy your character, and there's no evidence there. It's absurd. We were supposed to be a free society. We should be able to associate with who we want.
Well, and that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to, because I firmly believe this from watching it during this whole time, knowing what I know, and having to be quiet during this whole period of time, and watching this, and that one of the main objectives here politically is to suppress the conservative voice. You see that in the tech giants with their system, with their censorship. You see it, in so many different ways, and they want to make it very punitive for any conservative to come out, who particularly is a Trump supporter such as I am. They're going to make it punitive for you to voice. They don't want you to voice. But eventually facts come out, it's very trying, and I have to give my kudos to President Trump and everybody around him, that to go under this assault, knowing that what is being portrayed in the media is not true, and still be able to do the job that you're doing, is phenomenal. I had a very, very small role in this, and the pressure on me was, tremendous. And not a day or a couple hours to go by that you don't think about this, and you worry about, looking at your bank account and say, well, I better put some more money aside, that type of thing, and and then you worry about your reputation, and then you worry about the reputation of your family because they're related to you, yeah. And but like I said, you find out who your true friends are, and you find out who the good people are, and we're starting to see that now. You got Avenatti going into jail now. I mean, being charged like you wouldn't believe, and the Covington kids, and that you just mentioned, and you're seeing, with what just happened up in Chicago with the two-tier system. I guarantee you, if that was a Trump guy faking an assault, it'd be a totally different totally different thing. So that's what you're seeing now. You're starting to see, you can only put up a ruse for so long. Eventually, the truth does come out. The problem is just that it usually takes a long time for the truth to come out, and you have to be able to show, to remind people, that here's the truth. Here's what happened. And there was no collusion. There was no obstruction of justice. And what the the three intelligence chiefs, from McCain, from Comey and Brenner and and who was Clapper, the DNI. They go into, they take a dossier that is absolutely unsubstantiated. They know it's unsubstantiated, and because their first FISA request is rejected, and they need, because they need to put some validity behind this made up, paid for by the Democratic Party dossier. They launched this camp. I call it, it's a three-pronged campaign. One is they take the dossier after he is president, bring that into a top secret briefing with the president, and then hand that to him at the end. Once you do that, that document is a top secret document. Hand it to a president in a top secret meeting. So all of a sudden that gets credibility on that side, even though it's a totally made up, fictitious, document. And then you have Senator McCain. Now, I campaigned for Senator McCain when he was running for president with Palin. But McCain hated Trump. He did not like Trump. He did not want him to be president. And I think they played, and this is just my opinion, I think they played him, and let him go get that dossier and then turn that over to the FBI, because then you have a United States senator, a senior United States senator of the party of the president, handing over this dossier to the FBI. That gives credibility to it. And then you have the news leaks, which Comey, has admitted that he did as well. And McCabe did it, Page did it, and so forth. And that's how they were able to keep that FISA request going, because they had given credibility to something that the FISA judge at first rejected.
Are you still there, Donald?
Yeah, I am. I obviously I agree with most of what you said, and just to let you know, I'm hardly a partisan here. I'm pretty left wing on most issues, but I always get back to I end up defending Donald Trump more often.
You do. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but because no matter whatever he does to anger me or whatever stupid thing he says, his enemies always outdo him. They always anger me more. So that's it's amazing, because they are just so out of control. It's just, and I really wish this Jussie Smollett thing, which again, it angers me so much, this absurd justice system we have, where again, somebody who has any kind of celebrity, they just to drop charges like that. I don't know how much better evidence they could have, but I wish he had tried to frame actual individuals, because then again, I think he would be right behind the Covington kids and lining up and with great lawsuits, but you really can't. He just framed unnamed MAGA pat wearing white people. So
yeah, he's trying to maim he's put a black eye on a group of people, and which they're trying to do with anybody that wears a MAGA hat or is a Trump supporter or is a Republican or conservative. And there's a lot of moderate Democrats. I live here in West Virginia. I travel all through it. There are more Democrats in this region than there are Republicans, 2-1, sometimes 3-1, depending on which county you're in, all up and down the East Coast here and in the Appalachian regions. And they've left the Democratic Party, and this is only going to add to it. And this hard left that they're taking, is not being received very well here in this area, because I write a column from time to time. It's called American Pickle Barrel, and I write about this quite extensively. Ellis has read it. I don't think, Donald, you have. And but it points out that that difference here that you have between the somewheres and anywheres, and the East Coast elites versus what everybody in between, and you're seeing that. And I think even Van Jones is pointing this out now, and now you have even Obama doing it. Trying to point it out. They're trying to correct the ship.
Well, you can't have a party that the same voters that got Trump elected were the kind of people that switched over to Reagan, that were so-called Reagan Democrats. And this is what you have with Trump. We have a lot of white, poor, and working class voters that went to him, even though he was offering, he was not offering them anything as poor people, really, but they're so tired of being hit over the head with the Democratic Party, which, as you mentioned, West Virginia, all the old coal miners, and there's a lot of people that have a tradition of voting Democrat there. But they're tired. They're not wanted in the party because they're told if they're white, they're racist. They benefit from some kind of privilege, and they know if they're living in a shack, they supposedly have some kind of privilege. So they're tired of that. And they're actually, I think, voting for Trump out of spite. And I still say Trump represents a giant middle finger to the establishment. I think that's his greatest attribute, is that the hate that comes at him, people just kind of rally around him because we all hate the deep state and we all hate corruption, regardless of what we think of Trump. So, and that's the biggest thing he's got going for him.
Yeah.
Well, that's all. That's probably one of the positive things. I try to look at positive things, and as much, when there's a big rain cloud, that I'm sitting in the middle of. But you look at at that cloud and you realize that the deep state, or what you refer to as that, are being exposed now. You're seeing that being played out, and when these probes, these Inspector General probes are completed, you're going to see more of it. And they're being exposed now, and they're going to be in legal trouble, I believe. And I sincerely hope that. And the media has just lost all. I mean, this was you couldn't have got the whole ship of the line of the British Navy. Might as well just gave a broadside to somebody, And we know with this Mueller report. I mean, it just just sunk the media's narrative completely. And they have nowhere to run with this now. And the more they try to hold on to it, it's going to hurt them. And you're right, Donald. When you badmouth or you call him these names, President Trump, people here in flyover country are saying, "You're calling me that." And that really, really upsets me. And I see this all the time. I see this quite a bit, and people get riled up about that.
Mm-hmm. We don't have that. Well, we still have like 20. Well, we have like 15 minutes, and I know this is going back a little bit, but this is just something that I'm curious about, and maybe listeners are as well. What the process of going to the Senate Judicial Committee, what that look like? I'm just curious because it's behind closed doors and it's so secretive, and we all heard about this investigation. So I'm just curious what it was like. Maybe it's simpler than I think, because you kind of alluded to what occurred. But if you'd like to add any other details, I'd love to know.
Well, yeah, I'd be more than happy to, because the process itself is not, that's not a secretive, that's not too secretive. Fortunately for me, my attorney had done some, committee hearings before, and he had me excellently prepared and documents excellently prepared, at the request of Senator Feinstein and Grassley and then over at the Intelligence Committee. And, they contacted me first by, email, and then I referred them to my attorney. And then they worked out the necessary documents that were being requested and put them in the formats that are requested. And that's quite extensive, because you're talking about not only your emails, you're talking text messages, you're talking about any type of papers, recorded papers, or anything. It has to be presented. And so you present that in a certain format, which takes a long time to put together. And then you have to, you get ready to go, and you're given the dates, and they tell you exactly where and how to get into the rooms, particularly if it's behind closed doors. They do try to bring you in different places where, you're not going to be noticed. In my case, that's what they did, because both of mine was behind closed doors. And so you do that, and you go into this room. Your attorneys are not allowed to be there. You go in, you try to be as much prepared as you possibly can. It's very, it can be very stressful if you're not used to anything like this. And I have to say, this is the first time I've ever been, before a committee behind closed doors before. And, you go in there and it's 20 on 1 or 40 on 1. and you're just, and they're prepared. And it really astonishes you, and just how prepared they are, and how deep they can pull. They're pulling information and conversations out that you really didn't really know that you provided answers to. But fortunately, for me, it was the things that they pulled out of the thin air were things that didn't bother me at all. And So you give this testimony, and then to one, and then you go to the next one. Now that's usually the next day or a couple of days later or whatever. And when you go, you do not have the benefit of your previous testimony. You have to do everything from memory. And so you go and you do the same thing. If you change anything between those two testimonies, which we've now learned, they'll hang you. And even if you change the text or the context of something or the inference or an adjective or whatever, or you get your timing wrong because you told the story once, but then it jogged the memory later. Oh, wait a minute, this happened first, or this happened, and I didn't tell them. So you inform the other committee about this new revelation that you've remembered, and that can get you in big trouble, huge trouble. And they have testimony in front of you. They have all the documents. You don't, and you do have what you have provided, what your attorneys have provided, the committees. You do have that as a reference, but that's all. Anything they have copies, and they'll give you a copy of it when you're there, but you can't take it with you. You can't take any of this with you. So once you're done with that, you're sitting there for hours and hours and hours by yourself going through this. And they're very thorough. And I will say that the Senate Intelligence Committee, their staff and everything were very professional. They were very, it wasn't, beat you over the head type of thing. They were very thorough and they were very professional. The Judiciary Committee was as well, but there were some politics going on between Feinstein's group and Grassley's group, and they did not like each other. And that came out towards the last hour of my conversation because it was mostly one side making a political comment in a form of a question, and then the other one would make a counterpoint in the form of a question, and I'm sitting there in between them, and it's very evident what's going on, and but you got to be careful. Then once you're done with all this, you don't get a copy of your testimony. And so if you have to go before the House or somebody else, you don't have that with you. So you go again, and you have to do the same thing over. And if you change or if there's a discrepancy, you can really get in trouble. And that's basically what you have with Flynn. And I think some of the others that have gone through this. If you just that they can say, well, you didn't tell us this or this way, and you can get in very big trouble that way. And I think this has done a travesty to the system now, because if anybody after this point goes before a committee and gives testimony, and then gets called before other committees and gives, I would be very hesitant to give any more testimony before any other committees now, on this subject. I would say, I'll refer to you my Senate testimony. I'm not answering any questions that I may feel like are, resembling any questions that I answered there, because for fear that if I say something wrong, I don't remember it correctly, the way that I presented it, in the same text or context or subject matter or timing, you can be in big trouble. You get a criminal referral. And that's a lot of big pressure on people now. And I think right now, anybody who's got half a sense now, would be very careful about giving multiple testimonies to multiple committees now. And it's a travesty, and and you really don't until they close the investigation and so forth. I think then you're allowed to go back. I was allowed to go back 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later to read the testimony just to make sure it was correct, and that's it. But you can't take a copy of it with you. Anything they presented to you that you didn't have before, you don't get that either. So you're at a big disadvantage, when you're going through that. And you could be one of the most honest people in the world, and then just make a human mistake, and their attitude now is basically to hang you on that.
Because memory is not perfect, and stress will add to that as well.
Oh, absolutely. And sometimes after you tell a story, then you recollect something. There's something there that you recollect, and you say, "Oh, I forgot to tell him this," and because you didn't really think about it, and that could get you in big trouble.
It
So
sounds very
That's
stressful.
exactly what happened with Jerome Corsi. He told me that they were asking him again to go back years and remember all these emails. I mean, he gets the average person gets so many emails that they're not going to remember that, but someone like Corsi gets more than the average person. So how is he supposed to remember that? And they would chide him for you're forgetting, you're covering up, and it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I can't remember some of my emails from a week ago.
Well, a lot of us go out and we'll delete a bunch of them just to get them off our screens.
Right.
And or we put things in trash or spam that probably shouldn't be. It might not be there. It's just by accident they get there. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And you can get into a huge amount. You spend a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of anxiety. Your family does. Your family and your friends, your true friends, sharing that as well. It's not just a personal experience. It's an experience that people who know you or who are your true friends, your family, they all go through this with you, and it's not a nice thing to go through, particularly when you got little kids and you think about, man, if I mess up, I'm not going to be able to be with my grandkids. I'm going to miss my grandkids growing up. And just because I made a stupid mistake because I couldn't remember something correctly. That's what you think about.
And you'd mentioned, I don't know if this was before the show started, about your daughter, how that might affect her schooling. I don't know if you brought that up during the interview, the live interview, or we just talked to it prior to the interview.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. My daughter is, she's getting married. She's not in the state, and she's away in college right now, and she's got a nice, good job. This is a very smart young lady. This girl was, when she was a junior in high school, she was recruited by the NSA to work. And she worked for the NSA for her junior and senior year. And she's a very intelligent, one of the sweetest girls you ever met. Honest, and she does not seek confrontation whatsoever. And she's very bright. And she's been worried, being on a college campus and during this whole period of time, both in her undergraduates and now her graduates, and then also in her job where she's at. Being associated, people finding out who her dad is and what he's involved with, and then and then she gets, accosted for some reason, because you see this all the time, and the kids that wear in the MAGA hats are a complete example of that. And I give her credit because the whole time this was going on, at least, she had a Tea Party sticker on the back of her car. And I said, "You got some guts, girl."
Well, I'm glad that you came out intact and that your family came out intact. And we just have a few more minutes here, so maybe you can share with us what you're doing now, what some future plans are. And I don't really know. I also end on solutions, but I don't know if there's a solution to this. This is really. It's an awful situation. It seems just to be getting worse. Seems this division that's going on in our country, but not just between the parties, the extremes. It's overwhelming. I don't know what's going to happen here.
I was injured in Iraq in 2009. Yeah, and I've been recovering from that. I shared.
Thank you for your service. I really want to say thank you for your service.
And well, you're welcome. I was in the military. I was a Marine in the 80s. And once a Marine, always a Marine. But I was in the service then. When I was overseas, I had DoD credentials. But I served. I worked with these people. These kids. Day in, day out. They're not kids. They're adults. But you go through all that, and it's a wonderful type of experience. But I basically do what I want to right now, and I'm retired, so that's I get to do what I need to do, and what I like to do. And I'm glad you asked this question about what we need to do to get more to like civil discourse. I recently ran into a gentleman that I have known for a long time, but we've never met. We knew each other. He was the head of the Democratic Party in this area, and he knew me as a Republican operative. And we never met. We often debated. We were also on both sides, but we never met. But we met just recently, and we got to talking, and we were talking about the level of discourse right now that's in the public discourse and discussion in politics. He said, Rick, back in our day, if we went at each other on policy. We didn't go after this personal destruction. And we talked about what we thought were the causes. And, and one of the common themes that we have is the media. He's a liberal. He's a diehard Democrat, and he believes in what he believes in policy and so forth. And I'm the same thing on the other side. And that was one of the common threads that we both agreed on. That's when it's happening. And shows like yours, and the shows that both of your shows, and the shows that you have on iHeart, and what you see on Fox News and so forth, the Drudge and all this. That gives conservatives a voice. You have to have that voice. And there's going to be a time where we're just going to be butting heads until finally, good people like me and this gentleman, who just recently met, have discovered that, it's okay to go after each other on policy, but stop this personal destruction thing. And we all have our opinions of who started it and who's more egregious on it. But that's sad, and particularly when you look at our government right now, and people are, I call it the petticoat junction syndrome. If you watch TV and you knew anything about petticoat junction, there was a guy there that was a United States Ranger, and he was there to help people, and he did. And people, when an FBI agent comes to your door or whatever, back in the old days, they were like, yes, they had a lot of respect and you didn't fear them. That's changed. Anybody from the government comes knocking on your door or calls you or whatever, people get scared. And that's not what our government needs to be. It needs to be turned around so where, we go knocking on somebody's door, it's like, how can we help you? Or instead of, well, let me tell you something. You did this, I'm gonna fine you, out the rear end, and until you can't pay anything anymore. I'm gonna make you scared that you're gonna have to agree to say what I'm telling you to say, and that's bad, and we need to get away from that. And what went on at the highest levels of the DOJ and the FBI. Now, I'm not talking about the lower guys, because I know a lot of them, and they're wonderful people who, with good hearts and good missions. But these people weaponized those agencies, and we're seeing just how bad it was. I mean, I can't believe, was it Brenner just came out and said that he was given, maybe I had bad information?
I say, but that didn't surprise me. I mean, he's a lifelong spook, so he's gonna try to protect himself.
Oh, there we go, guys. We're out. Thank you for this extraordinary interview, and don't forget to donate to our station, freedomslips.com. And again, thank you, Donald, and I'll speak to you guys soon.